Okay, we good? All right. So last week I talked about. Well, come on in, guys. Come on in. Can we get them some? What's
That's a good entrance.
Wow.
If you come, that's why they come in late, because they like the entrance. It's like cheers.
Real dramatic of you, Mandy. Real dramatic.
Mandy, Matt.
Okay, well, we're making you copies. Sorry. Okay, so last week we talked about authority and submission to authority. And that was a really good class. We did like a lot of little group activities and kind of open up the scriptures. So if you have, if you can get on YouTube and go back and watch it, it was a really good time. And but you don't need to know anything about that to hear about what we're going to talk about tonight. So, regardless of where each of you are tonight, you all have influence to some degree. Would you agree with that? At some place in your life, you have influence, or you can affect change in areas of your life, right? Right? So maybe at work, maybe you have people under you and you have influence over them. Or maybe you're a really good employee and you have influence in your boss's life because you're really nice to them and they want to listen to you. Maybe in your church, maybe you're a leader in whatever church you go to and you have some influence there. Maybe just in the community at large, maybe in your family, over your kids or other members of your family. We all have these areas of influence and leadership, and that's really relevant to what we're talking about. And I don't want you to think of everything I'm talking about tonight from the perspective of a leader. That is really important, but it affects every area of influence you have, every relationship you have, every interpersonal relationship you have a level of influence in that relationship. And so think about those things as we're talking about this tonight. Our topic tonight is character. As a follower of Jesus, our character is of utmost importance. And sadly, it is something that is overlooked or missed and not taught very often. Character is an essential part to following Jesus. What you do and who you are in private is critical to your heart for Jesus. Okay? This teaching isn't meant to guilt trip you. Okay? There might be some times where you start to feel like, I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to guilt you. Yeah, we don't have time for shame here. This teaching isn't meant to create a sense of religious obligation, but the reality is that God ultimately cares about who you are and what you're becoming. And if there's areas of your life and there's things that you feel are getting touched on, maybe put a star down, like write down what that is. Like, what is all of a sudden, like, I'm feeling some stuff. Write that down on the side of your paper. I have the whole back of the paper empty for you if you want to go nuts tonight, if you're feeling super convicted. And again, my goal tonight is not that, but it's for us to all take an honest look at character and the role that plays in our influencing our relationships and the people around us. When Mary Allison and I were making the decision to leave the ministry that we started in Chillicothe 2 years ago, God clearly spoke to both of us that we were not to jump in ministry right away. That when we left Chillicothe, moved to Dayton, we didn't know why we were moving to Dayton. We're just moving to Dayton because God said so. And he said not to jump into ministry right away. And the exact words that we felt him speak was, I'm more concerned about who you are becoming than what you will do. Who you are becoming are people that are more dependent on me. And I actually wrote that line in my resignation letter to the church, that was the heart behind us leaving, was to become who God was calling us to be. And that I wasn't going to be seeking a position of ministry there. And so God wanted to work on Mary Allison in the place of our character. He wanted those 2 years, that time, to be out of the limelight in ministry, to be out of the stages, out of the platforms, out from behind things like this, so that he could work on our hearts and make us more dependent on him. He wanted to find out if we were willing to lay a call to ministry on the altar for our faithfulness to him. So this teaching tonight is from the heart of Jesus in order to serve you. Again, it's not to burden you. It's not to cause you shame. It should be freeing for you tonight to find out that God cares more about your heart than what you're doing. That should be freeing, because the message a lot of people teach is it's all about what you're doing. God cares way more about your heart. That's what he's after. And he wants everything you do to flow out of a place of knowing who you are in him. And this might be like, here we are. Right off the bat, you may think, man, this is all this. Like, I get this stuff. I am an expert on character. Like, why are you talking to me about this? And the reason that I feel like we need to talk about this tonight is because we live in a society that promotes a message that is exactly the opposite of what I'm talking about tonight. The messages that are rubbing off on us all around us are the opposite of your heart and who you are when no one's looking matters. That is not what our society and our culture teaches. And I believe that whether you realize it or not, those messages get into each of our brains a little bit, and we start to believe those lies. In America, where we live, it is all about what you do, right? Think about it. Whenever you're asked, it's like, I meet someone new. What's your name? What do you do? Right? What use are you? You know, like what are you contributing to this society we're living in? You know, I got your name. Okay, now what do you do? It's all about what you do in America. And so even the motivational speakers and business leaders of our day teach that if you just change your actions or your minds enough, then you would do better and you'd be a better person. We hear things like, your attitude determines your altitude.
Powerful stuff. Come on.
We hear things like, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade.
So bad.
Yeah.
So bad.
So sour.
But that's the problem. That's the problem, you guys, is those little messages. And those are some of the cheesy ones that we're all, familiar with. But those same messages are squeezing into every area of our society. And if we're not careful, we can let those seep in and be our motivation. These are interesting ideas, but they miss the point. We don't need another formula, phrase, or psychological concept to motivate ourselves. How many of you have ever heard of the guy Stephen Covey? Franklin Covey planners. He wrote seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I think he wrote 1,000 books called 7 Habits of whatever. But he's actually an awesome guy. And he actually did a study on this. And listen to this. He said that prior to World War I, there was almost nothing on psychological and attitudinal training. And all leadership teaching before World War I was solely centered around the idea of character and who you were. But after World War I, that has gone away. What truly motivates your heart? It was all about who you are when no one's looking. How can you control your desires? How can you respond to what is true? How do you deal with pain? How do you handle failure? But then the psychological movements came in with this scary revelation that you can actually manufacture some of the fruits of the people who spend all this time working on their character. If you just had the right amount of training and trickery, you could convince people that you're really a great leader. If we look at the fruit of the leadership politically and spiritually in our society today, we see that this is what is believed and lived out. Because we see so many political leaders, so many spiritual leaders who have zero character. But they have risen to a place of leadership in our society because they're not leading from the right place and they're using trickery and all kinds of stuff to try to get ahead to where they are. This is scary stuff. And the fact that there are ways I can influence and affect change in the world that does not come from the center of who I am scares me. That scares me. There's people out there who are manipulative and fear-driven, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Here's the other thing. Nearly everyone in church thinks, am I through?
I don't know, just.
Okay. I thought someone was peeing in a bottle.
No, it was like
Okay. I honestly appreciate the perseverance. Like, I'm not leaving this teaching, I'm going to pee in a bottle. That's character right there. Okay. Nearly everyone that is in church today automatically assumes that they have good character. It's true. Everyone thinks they're pretty good. But this is dangerous because if we all believe we have good character, then we don't believe that there's any room for improvement in our lives. We think that this message is all about someone else. It's about the person sitting next to me. It's about my neighbor down the street. We don't think we're the ones that need to grow in character, and this is dangerous. Because all of us have areas of our character that need improvement and that need a touch from God in our lives. You have never arrived, my friends. You will never arrive. So, when we think that there are hidden motivations and methods that we can use to affect change and influence people, and we may not even realize we're doing it. You know, this could be with your friends, your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, and more. You may be using these wrong psychological, attitudinal-based messages, and you're not even realizing it. But allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you and to show you what are the hidden places, the motivations of how I interact with people. And this is actually a really good segue into why you should come to Keep Your Love On this summer. Because that is kind of one of the things, and how you interact with people on a relational level and who you are in them. All right, so first fill in the blank. You guys know I love fill in the blanks. What is the best way to influence and affect change in different areas of your life? What is the best way to influence and affect change in the different areas of your life? One way that you can do this is through force. That's your next fill in the blank. Force. Notice there's a question mark there. Spoiler alert, I'm probably thinking this isn't the best way. Okay. Fear, but listen, fear is a powerful motivator. Fear and guilt. We can think that the most effective way to get people to do something is if we scare them to death. Right? How many of you guys have seen this type of motivator? The fear-based motivator, the force-based motivator. They make people feel smaller than they are. They make them feel that there are negative consequences if they don't respond in the right way. If you don't do what I want you to do, then there's going to be punishment. You're going to get the silent treatment. You're not going to be in our group anymore. You're going to have anger. You're going to have yelling. We might not even realize this, but those are fear-based, force-based methods of interacting with people. So if you're the type of person who, when you're ticked off at somebody, you decide, I'm going to just give them the silent treatment, you're not operating and you're not influencing from the place of your character. You're influencing from a place of fear and punishment. What this actually tends to do is create an environment where people feel like they need to walk on eggshells around you. Everyone is nervous. There is no safety to be yourself because you don't know if you're going to respond in the wrong way, and it's going to affect you negatively because there's always punishment for everything you do. And this is, yes, we see it in marriages, we see it in families, we even see it in churches. And I have actually seen pastors do this. They just try to intimidate people into doing it. And I actually remember one time I was at this church, but I'm not going to name it, and I'm not going to name any names because this is going on the internet. But a member of this church was talking to a pastor. Just think about how innocent this is and what he was talking to a pastor about possibly doing a mission trip that was outside the norm of the mission trips this church did. Well, in the middle of the fellowship hall, on a Sunday morning, as people are walking into the church, This discussion slowly escalated to the point of them yelling at each other in the middle of the church, because the pastor did not want to do things the way this member was bringing up.
Oh my gosh.
Okay? That is a fear-based motivation. I'm going to yell at you if you don't do what I want you to do. We laugh about this stuff, but there are pastors that do this and lead this way in our churches today. I have seen this in family members who have so many unmet expectations of their families that they're constantly punishing them for both spoken and unspoken desires that aren't being met. I have a particular family member, again, not going to name names, who constantly does this to a point where in our family it's a regular joke as to whether that member of the family is talking to you or not. Are you on speaking terms? Like, that's the joke in our family, because this person leads completely from a fear-based motivation. A second way we can try to influence and affect change would be manipulation. Manipulation. Again, what do I have there? Is it a question mark?
I think this is going to be the good one.
No, it's not. Weirdly enough, these people are actually really great with people. They are warm, they talk well, and they're often respected by many around them because their motivation is to be liked by people. Okay? They're usually really relationally based, and their whole motivation is based on the fact of whether people like them, and so they can get them to do what they want them to do because you like me. So I'm going to use my relational capital to manipulate you into doing what I want. They use their strength and relational capacity to keep things moving. This tends to make people feel very connected, especially if you're that leader who's leading this way, because they try to pull people in with these manipulative things like, hey, we really need to be praying for so-and-so because... And then, they're sharing little secrets, and they're bringing up and they're playing people against each other, even out of like a prayer request type way. Okay? Leaders like this are typically really insecure. They have no confidence in who they are or what God has asked them to do. They aren't driven by character. They are driven to have people like them. But if you end up doing this and you're constantly playing everyone off of each other, then eventually those people are going to talk to each other and realize that you're manipulating them, and everything's going to blow up in your face. What happened? Why is everybody mad at me? Because you're not leading from the right place. You're leading from a place of manipulation. The third place that we could influence and affect change is gifting. And you're thinking, Nick, what's wrong with gifting? What's wrong? Why would it be bad to influence change from a place of gifting? Saul is a great example of this. Saul in the Bible, okay? King Saul. He was the first king of Israel, and he was appointed when God was telling them, you don't need a stinking king. You're just trying to be like everyone else and get over it. But no, we want a king, so he gave him Saul. And if you look at 1 Samuel 10, you see that Saul was actually a really gifted guy. In 1 Samuel 10, verse 23, it says they ran and brought him out, and he stood among the people, and he was a head taller than any of the others. I love this. He's taller. He's better looking than anyone else. He's smarter, right? This is Saul. This is their king. And everything he does, he just succeeds at it, okay? Like, this is what this guy does. When you could tell he's gifted because he's a gifted strategizer. When he goes to war, he wins wars. He's a winner. It is clear that this guy is gifted with strategies, and people want to follow that. This happens in promoting people to a place of leadership. This happens in churches a lot because people who typically end up on the stage are just the people that are the most gifted, not necessarily the people that have the best character. They shine on the stage. Think about those worship leaders that when they get up there, God's presence just fills the room. That's because they're gifted at worship leading. Or someone prays, and when you see that person getting up to pray on the stage, you're so excited because you know God's going to do something because that person is gifted at leading in corporate prayer. Gifting is not wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being gifted. But gifting and the favor and blessing of God have nothing to do with character. God allows his gifting to rest on people that actually may end up blowing themselves up down the road about it. You may be thinking, like, what? God doesn't do that. He does. He did it in Saul. And then when this typically happens, when there's this big blow up, we want to try to rewrite history. We say things like, well, obviously that wasn't God moving their life. You know, God wouldn't bless their life. God wouldn't put favor on their life if he knew there. No, God gifts and whoever he pleases. He does. And look at Saul. In verse 9 and 10 of the same chapter, it says, the Spirit of the Lord was resting on Saul. It says it again and again and again. In verse 9, it says, as Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. And all these signs were fulfilled that day. So there's God changing his heart. And when he and his servants arrived at Gibeah, a procession of prophets met him. And the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he joined in their prophesying. This guy's anointed, he's gifted, he's tall, he's handsome. The Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord rested on him. And yet we all know the ending of Saul's story, don't we? It didn't end well because he didn't lead and work on the place of character. If a person isn't built up of the right stuff, they're going to blow up eventually. And it's going to wound people in every direction. So, what's the solution? And I believe this is your last fill in the blank, and I believe this is the answer. The best way to influence and affect change is from a place of character. The best way to influence and affect change is from a place of character. All right, so what is it that reveals our character? What's crazy about gifting versus character is that often if you're standing in a room and people are getting healed, or you're up there leading worship and people are being moved into the presence of God and people are feeling him, typically those people start to think, well, God must be okay with me because he's moving in this room. People are being healed. Things are happening. So because I'm gifted, then God must be okay with everything I'm doing. That is a dangerous way of thinking. And we're going to get to why Saul messed up with that here in a second. The way that character is revealed is almost solely through testing. And that's your next fill in the blank. Through testing. Character is revealed through testing. When things are going well, we don't really know who you are. But when pressing comes, when the difficult season comes, that's when we find out what you're made of. The example I've heard used is, you really never know what's in a tube of toothpaste until you squeeze it. You really don't.
I've never heard that.
And that's the same way with people. We never know what's in you until you're squeezed. If you guys could open up to 1 Samuel 13, or turn on your phones to 1 Samuel 13, starting in verse 5. I want us to read something together. I want to show you how we see that Saul didn't really measure up in the midst of his character being tested. Who's there? 1 Samuel 13, verse 5. 1 Samuel 13, verse 5. Can you read it for me?
The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers. Am I the right one?
Yeah.
And soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear.
So I'm going to go through verse 12.
Okay.
I probably should have told you that.
He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. And Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering."
Yes. It's verse 13 says, "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command that the Lord your God gave you, and if you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." So in this story, we see that Saul's character is tested. He has been told that he needs to wait 7 days for Samuel to show up and give sacrifices for them to go into the battle. But what does he do? Here's a testing place. Are you going to trust God to send Samuel at the point of time to make the sacrifices, or are you going to try to take matters into your own hand? We were talking about timing earlier. Lauren was talking about waiting on the Lord's timing. Saul, right here, we see his character. And then not only does he not trust God and not trust what God spoke through Samuel, but he then tries to justify his sin, right? He's like, well, hold on. Let me tell you why I sinned and why it's good that I sinned the way I did. No, you were told to wait 7 days and Samuel was going to do it, and you did it. When the tube is squeezed, you find out what's really in there. Because Saul is suddenly in a circumstance where he has to trust God, and then he justifies why he didn't trust God. We find out that what's in Saul is not really good character. Okay. In the midst of testing, we need to be faithful in the little things. That's your next fill in blank. In the testing, we need to be faithful in the little things. And we all know this verse, right? Jesus in Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is," you might as well actually, I'm going to be in Luke 16 for a little bit. You can go ahead and turn there. So whoever is trusted with very little can be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. And let me tell you this. In my 6 years as a youth pastor, I looked for this constantly. I looked for the people that were going to be faithful with the little things. If someone wanted to be on stage in our youth ministry leading worship, I had to see that this reality was being met in them already. I wouldn't let you be on the stage, and I thought God wouldn't let them be on the stage unless they were already faithful in the little things. I would look out. Were they willing to stay after our services were done to help clean up, to help put up chairs? Would they show up even if they weren't leading worship on stage that night? Mm-hmm. Would they help in the non-shiny jobs and do that faithfully first? And if I saw those things, there was one girl I remember in particular, her name was Jessica, and she asked to be on the worship team, and I would not let her do it for the longest time because I wanted to see that she was going to be faithful with the small things. And I'm telling you, she showed up, always. Showed up early, stayed late, to put the chairs up, to clean up the trash that all the other kids left there. And you can bet I put her up on that stage once she proved that she was willing to be faithful in the small things. And I believe that God does this with us as well. He's looking to see, are you going to be faithful in the small? Are you going to be faithful when you're not in front of everybody? Are you going to be faithful when it's just you alone with him? The temptation that we have is to look for the shiny people, to look for the pretty people. The people God is looking for are just the ones who say yes to him in every area of their life. That's who God is looking for. Not the ones who just say yes to him when it's glorious and when it's fun, but those who say yes to him when it's hard and when no one is there praising them for doing it. But if they neglect the little things, how can they be trusted with the bigger things? You see, a little bit of disobedience in your life will spread into everything you do. I really believe that. I think a little bit of disobedience in your life will work through the whole thing. So if you think you can go on and continue being disobedient in the place of your finances, and then it's not going to spread to other areas, I think you're mistaken. If you think that you can go on being disobedient in the relationships and in the friendships you have in your life, and it's not going to spread to other areas, I think you may have been deceived. Are you willing to be obedient in how you treat your leaders in your life and the authority God has placed over you? Are you willing to take the little things seriously? Because that matters to God. Also, in the midst of testing, this is your next fill in the blank, we need to learn to be faithful in the non-spiritual realm. We need to be faithful in the non-spiritual realm. Nate, what are you talking about? Go to verse 11 in Luke 16. Someone read that for me, just verse 11. Luke 16, verse 11.
So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?
Ooh. How do you do when Jesus isn't being talked about? How do you do in the environment of your family, your work, and your money? How do you handle those situations? Do you work hard at work when it's not all about Jesus and you're not at church with all your church friends? Do you really work hard when no one's looking? Are you a person who's a blessing to your boss instead of someone who's gossiping and working behind their back? Do you help to call people to be more of who they are at work? You see, you can do that at your workplaces. It doesn't just have to be here. You can prophesy into people's lives in the non-spiritual realm as well and call them to be more of who they're called to be in life. Are you willing to do that in those places? Because Jesus is saying, if you're not trustworthy with worldly riches, how am I going to trust you with real riches, true riches? God pays attention to that stuff in every area of our life. The last little, well, no, this is the last one, sorry. We also must be faithful in following another. And this is basically what I talked about. Verse 12, who wants to read verse 12? Go on, continuing on.
And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?
And this is exactly what I talked about last week. If you are not going to be faithful to the vision of leadership that is over you, God will not give you your own vision. I believe that full-heartedly. You need to bless your leaders. You need to love your leaders. You need to be the champions of them because God told us, and I'm not going to go over it all again, but everything I taught last week, God is very serious. When we try to usurp authority, he never blesses that. When we are trying to go above our pay grade and what God has called us to do, he's not going to bless that. He's going to bless the people who are willing to obey their leadership, even when it's hard. The last piece of testing is timing. Timing. And this is exactly what Lauren was talking about. Do we seek God's timing, or do we know what our timing is and then ask God to bless that? Right? That shows your character. That shows your character in a big way in how you respond to God's timing. Because the reality, my friends, is that God will never bend to you. You must bend to him. He is never, ever late. And this might be hard for some of us to hear, but I want you to hear it. God is never, ever late. He is always on time. And if you're tempted to believe that God is late, you may want to ask him about your timing. What is being squeezed out that I might need to be changed to be more like God? You may need to seriously ask yourself this if you're in this place. Because if not, you're going to spend a lot of time whining and complaining about how things aren't being done the way you want them to be done and at the timing you want them to be done. Missing out on what God's doing because you're spending so much time in negativity. In our ambitions, in our pain, and in our weakness, he is never late. He's never late. Trust his timing. Are you faithful in the waiting? Because that will show you a lot about your character. And when I was writing this point and thinking about this, I really think, and I'm glad he's not here because it would have been awkward to talk about it. But for me, someone who does this extremely well is Jack. Especially when you think about his music. Jack waited on the Lord. He waited on the Lord's timing to move his music ministry into the place where it's going to go. And I told him this morning, he said, I don't know what it is, but I feel like we're on the breaking point of something new. I said, Jack, I think that's because you've been faithful to him in the place of your music. And I really think that, I mean, I may be wrong, but I really think that God is going to bless Jack's music like crazy over the next couple of years. And we're going to see him take off because he waited on the Lord's timing. He waited on the Lord to appoint him. He waited on the Lord to get everything set. He didn't try to do it all in his own strength and figure it out and fight. He said, Lord, when it's timing, when it's your timing, that's when I'll go forward with my whole music career. And he did that, and he waited on the Lord. And that shows you a lot about Jack's character. Again, I'm glad he's not here. I want to say nice things about people while they're here. All right, let's go back to 1 Samuel. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 15. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 15. If you guys could turn there real quick. And we're going to look at the last little section here is when character fails you. When character fails you. 1 Samuel 15. Who wants to read for me verses 1 through 11? This is 1 Samuel 15, verses 1 through 11.
I will do that for you.
Yes, thank you. Everybody listen up.
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women.
Okay, real quick. Listen to this part. This is a command that Saul is being given. Put to death. Start
Do
there.
not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, go away, leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night.
So the first thing we see here is that when character fails Saul, that what can set in is self-deception. And that's your fill in the blank, self-deception. Self-deception. He was very deceived, Saul was. You'd think that when Samuel comes to confront him, Saul would wake up and realize maybe doing things on my own aren't really working out, right? Like, I keep getting confronted by this Samuel guy every time I go and try to do things my way. So maybe, just maybe, I need to figure it out and do things differently another way. But at this time, Saul is told to go and kill all the people, everyone, man, woman, child, every animal he's told to kill even. But what does he do? He saves the king, and he saves the best animals. And what does he earn for doing that? He earns himself a confrontation from Samuel again. He's not figuring it out, folks. He is so deceived. In verse 10 and 12, it says this, then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was angry and he cried out to the Lord all night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. Saul is completely self-deceived right now. He is nuts. He is a crazy person. Go on to verse 13. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, Wow, the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions. What a crazy response. Imagine you're Samuel. You've been up crying all night because this guy won't stop screwing up and he won't listen to God. And you're just like, God has told you, like, he regrets making Saul king. And you walk over and he's like, hey, man, I'm building that statue to myself. And, I did everything God told me to do. How you doing? I mean, I just can't imagine what Samuel's face must look like. Right?
Or that anger again.
Right. Are you kidding me? It is possible to not deal with your stuff as God confronts you to such an extent that when you are in clear rebellion to him and when it is looking you right in the face, you still can't see what's going on. When your character is so weak, self-deception can creep in so far that you actually think you're doing the right thing, even when God's confronting you face to face. Saul is legitimately thinking that he is carrying out the Lord's instruction. He goes through 3 different encounters with Samuel where Samuel is trying to wake him up, but he just doesn't get it. In verse 14, it says, but Samuel said, get ready. This verse is just like, it gives me chills. Verse 14, but Samuel said, what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? Samuel is saying, I can hear the animals that you were supposed to kill, and they are calling out against you. You need to ask yourself, friends, honestly and truly, as you sit here, is there anything in your life that would cry out against you? Is there any relationship in your life that would cry out against you? Does your computer cry out against you? Does your checkbook cry out against you? Does your past work history cry out against you? Now listen, there's no time for shame. Don't live in ignorance. If God is revealing something to you, don't beat yourself up about it. Know the reality, know the facts of it, and move forward into freedom and wholeness. Don't live in shame. That's not why I'm talking about this. But if, as you sit here, you can sit there and think, there are things in my life that could call out against me, and if they did, man, would I be just totally humiliated and embarrassed. But I'm telling you today, if you stop, turn, and repent and run after God, he's going to bless you.
Amen.
He's going to bless you as you do that. Now listen to what Saul says as he's confronted. And this is really just true self-deception in its worst form. And this actually is called, when self-deception when you have bad character and you're self-deceived, the worst place it can get to is false repentance. And that's your last fill in the blank. False repentance. Verses 24 through 31. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's commands and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. There's a lot we could talk about there, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being, that he should change his mind. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people, before Israel. Come back with me, so that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. So Saul basically, after he's confronted and after basically this scathing record, he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I did all this. Will you please bless me, forgive me. I'm so sorry. But God is saying, it's over. I've given you chance and chance and chance again to respond. And now I'm confronting you. And this is when you're trying to spiritualize your sin. And here's what I'm trying to say. If you have kids, you know the difference between getting caught and confessing. Those are two different positions of the heart, right? If your kid is responding to you because you caught them doing something wrong or something they shouldn't be doing, oh, please, I'm so sorry, I won't ever do it again. That is a completely different heart than, hey, I'm sorry, but I accidentally broke the lamp, or whatever it may be. Coming to you, I don't know, like as a parent, there's a complete difference, right? When you see your kid confess, like your heart is just so touched, like, because their heart, that's a place of character in them that's developing early on when they're confessing and repenting of their issues. And so you see, God's perspective is always about your heart. He's after your heart. He's looking at your heart. He is after your character. And this is why living life in community is so important, I believe. You need to have people in your life that you can go to when you're struggling. Before you get completely to the place where you've fallen, you need to have people in your life that you can go to and say, hey, I'm really struggling in this area. Can you help me? You need to have people in your life that you can trust, and that God, and I believe that God will lift you up as you choose to live humbly before him. It says that God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. He will give you grace when you confess. There is always grace for you. So be careful to realize that God cares more about your heart than anything that you're doing today. He cares about your heart. He cares about what's inside of you. He cares about who you are when no one else is looking. He cares about who you are in the dark. He wants your heart. He wants you to be more and more like him. And he cares about how your character is formed. And that's the place he wants you to lead in every relationship of your life. He wants you to really to influence and affect change out of a place of a character that is deeply impacted by the person of Jesus Christ. God, we thank you so much for just your grace, Lord. Right now, I pray against any shame that tries to latch on to anyone in this room. God, I pray that your Holy Spirit would invite people just into freedom, or that people would lay down just things they've held on to, wrong directions they've gone, God. Lord, I pray that I would do that. I pray that I would lay down the places in my life that I haven't fully submitted to you, God. Lord, show us what you're putting your finger on in this season. Show us what it is you want to develop in us, God. Show us what it looks like, God, to be a person of character, of godly character in you. Lord God, I pray that everything that's taught here today, that your Spirit would counsel about it later, that no other voices would be heard, but your Spirit, God. Your Spirit would counsel us and show us how to live this out, would show us how to lead and love from the place of a transformed heart. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.